Welcome to the Compendium Podcast, hosted by Leadership Books. In just moments, our host, Michael Stickler, will be joining us with a very special guest. Before we get started, I would like to introduce you to Michael. He's a 4-time best-selling author, philanthropist, publisher, and highly sought-after conference speaker. His passion is to see life-changing books find their audience. Books that will change your life, change your business, and change your soul. And he specializes in helping authors and business owners achieve publishing success. Won't you please welcome Michael Stickler?
Well, thank you, Ron, for such a great introduction. Yes, I'm Mike Stickler with the Compendium Podcast, and today we have a very special guest, a very unique guest I think you're going to enjoy listening to quite a bit about his book, really his memoir, Undercover. Author Jack Barsky was born 4 years after the end of World War II in East Germany, and while studying chemistry, he was recruited by the KGB. Years later, he started his career as an illegal sleeper agent in the United States. That's right. And after 10 years of spying for the Soviets, Barsky quit the KGB. And 9 years later, he was discovered by the FBI. Now, today, Barsky is a U.S. citizen. What happened in between is a tale of gut-wrenching choices, appalling betrayals, Barsky's turbulent inner world, and the secret life he lived for years without getting caught. I can just imagine. What makes Jack unique is just during the entire 1980s that he was that undercover agent, and he has a lot to offer. He's spoken on many broadcasts, including 60 Minutes, and so many others. His book was translated into German, Swedish, Polish. Jack's story has received international attention from the British, the French, the Germans, Polish, Turkish, and even Japanese TV. And of course, as I mentioned, Jack's been on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, The Daily Show, A&E, and even on Glenn Beck. So Jack Barsky, welcome to the Compendium Podcast.
Thanks for having me. We're somewhat acquainted, so I know this is going to be a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. This is one that's so unique. I just really wanted to dive right in. So tell our audience the backstory, Jack. Tell us how you got recruited and what life was like here in the United States. A little bit about the book. Just kind of give us the big picture of what all happened.
I have to talk really fast. The book is 320 pages, and my first draft was like 400 pages, and 80 pages wound up on the cutting floor. So yeah, grew up in the most impoverished part of post-war Germany, in East Germany under Soviet occupation. Got brainwashed the way my entire generation was brainwashed from cradle to now. We didn't reach grave, but we heard nothing in terms of philosophy and the worldview and life in general. We heard nothing but communist theory. Nothing else was allowed. And so when you start early in the life of a child, you lay a foundation that is very, very difficult to get rid of. So when I was a chemistry student in my third year, the KGB knocked on the door, and I was already a party member. I was 100% convinced that communism was going to eventually conquer the entire world and would make the world a heaven on earth, so to speak, for all the working people. Sure. And so when the KGB knocked on the door, I felt flattered in a big way. Didn't quite know. I never thought, like, secret agent was never one of my dreams.
Right.
I wanted to be a college
Jack,
professor.
how old were you at this point?
I was 22.
Okay.
Still quite immature. And it did not have a mentor or a functioning father figure, which is important because if I had one, I might not have jumped into this. So the KGB introduced themselves, and it was a year and a half of very slowly getting to know each other. They did not recruit me on the spot. They saw in me a very promising candidate for something very special, which is undercover, a sleeper agency for which they were actually combing through several thousand applicants. This is based on an interview that one of the ex-heads of the KGB gave. And so, and after a year and a half, I was then approached and says, well, it's time to make a decision. You're joining or not? And my ideology and my desire to travel, which is something that's genetic to Germans, and the whole flattery that comes with being recruited by the most powerful organization in the history of mankind. The KGB had 1 million employees. All of that together made me say, yeah, let's go. I had no idea what I was signing up for. I had no idea. I was what I thought about agency espionage was out of books, literature, and some movies that we had our East German James Bond. And so it was a lot of adventure and, the good life and womanizing, all that stuff, and here and there stealing some secrets. It turned out to be completely different, but that's, I'm going to stop answering the question right now, unless you want me to go on with when I came to the U.S.
Sir, yeah, so go ahead, talk to us about the U.S., and then I've got some questions about parallels of today, but let's talk about U.S. first, your time here in the U.S.
So it turns out that I had at one point, unknown, undetected language for talent to acquire foreign languages, and even in a way that would allow me to minimize the accent that most foreigners have. I know that I have an accent. I can hear it when I hear myself recorded, but it was minimal, and it would work in New York. So I was really an ideal candidate that they could bring to the United States under the pretense that I was actually born here.
Right.
For that purpose, they stole the ID of a child that died early in his 11th year. His name was Jack Barsky, and we acquired his birth certificate. And when I came to the U.S., to New York, I used that birth certificate to parlay this into a set of documentations that enabled me to work and live in the U.S. as a citizen. I actually at one point voted multiple times illegally. So I worked from scratch because I came here with no documentation that I had any kind of knowledge in chemistry or math or whatever. So my first job was a bike messenger in Manhattan. Sure. I did this for 2 years, and then I went to college, got a degree in information technology, and that started a professional career as a programmer and eventually as a manager and executive in information technology. It was interesting, the good life took quite a while to materialize. It took about 10 years. That was after I broke up with the KGB, when I threw myself into a career, to build a career and build the American dream, at which point I had lost fundamentally all of my communist foundation, but it took quite a while.
Sure. And so what did you do for the KGB while you were working for them?
Well, this is I kind of hate that question because I'm going to give an answer that will deflate a lot of listeners. Mm-hmm. What was most important to them was the fact that I was here. And I know this for a fact, even though it was never directly told me in my face, because I met a colleague of mine who was also recruited by the KGB, also came to the United States as an illegal, and his task was nothing but just live there When we need you, we'll call on you.
Oh, I see.
That's what a sleeper is all about. And particularly, there were some situations in the middle of the 80s when the Cold War got pretty warm,
Right.
almost hot, where there was a chance that all the diplomats would be kicked out of the country, and then who was left behind the enemy lines, so to speak, was us. Now, in addition to establishing myself, I also was supposed to collect political intelligence. The plan was for me to get to a point where in society where I could mingle with folks that were political decision makers or at least influencers. There were the names of some conservative think tanks were given to me. The Trilateral Commission that they were really afraid of. Columbia University, where Zbigniew Brzezinski, the national security advisor to Carter, taught. That wasn't quite possible, not as a bike messenger, not as a junior programmer.
Sure.
But I periodically sent reports on, what Americans think about certain events that happen in the world. Most likely they were more valuable than what the diplomat agents sent to the Central Committee, because they pretty much, read the New York Times and extracted it and sent it out. I also had some special assignments, a couple of them that, well, actually 3 of them, that had to do with the fact that I could travel freely in the United States, whereas the diplomats were limited to a 50-mile radius outside of around New York and Washington, D.C. And lastly, towards the end, I was also advised to engage in some industrial espionage. I actually managed to steal the source code for one sizable computer system that was very popular in those days. Whether they could use this or not, I have my doubts, because that computer code also had to do with a particular organizational structure. And communist enterprises weren't structured the way American enterprises are. So anyway, so that's in a nutshell what I was supposed to do. Apparently, I was successful enough, because they awarded me with the second highest decoration of the Soviet Union in my 8th year of service here.
Wow.
The Order of the Red Banner, which I do not have in my possession. That's my ex-wife has that in Germany.
Okay. So Jack, how do you look back on those years and compare to what you see going on today? I mean, you're an American. You've chased down the American dream. You've become very successful, and now you look back. What do you see?
What I saw then was capitalism mostly functioning reasonably well, and you could, even if you started very low, you could work yourself into a position where you would be a member of the middle class if you wanted to go even higher.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, there was the glue that we call patriotism was still pretty much in place. That glue has been busted. There's a large sector of the population that really thinks that the American system stinks, that America needs to be more like Europe, and it needs to be more fair, and on and on and on it goes. And there are elements of socialist, communist thinking in there. And you mix this all up with race, and what we have is a highly fractionalized and politically right down the middle divided country, which is not a good place to be, because if we have too much focus on our internal differences, we really we're not focusing on the external threats, and they are growing bigger, particularly coming out of China. Russia has always been there. So I'm concerned with regard to whether this trend can be reversed or not. I don't know.
And if you look at the 22-year-olds today, some of these that you're talking about, who feel like the system's completely failed and there needs to be a new structure, and the socialism, communism, Marxism kind of thought, what would you say to that 22-year-old from your 22-year-old self?
Well, from my 22-year-old self, I was privileged as far as within East Germany, because I was a top-notch student, and I was already somebody at university as a student. So I didn't have any incentive to question Marxism. I didn't dig at all. It worked fine for me. But that from the perspective I've gained now, because I'm also consider myself a student of history. I liked history from when I was in middle school. And when you look at history, when you look at communist countries, or countries that started out as communists, they, without fail, they all wound up as a dictatorship.
Right.
With suppression of freedom, and with a small ruling class, and then the masses underneath. I have also another perspective, and that has something to do with the size of organizations. The more you send, the bigger the organization, the less effective it is. And government is the biggest organization that we could possibly think of.
Right.
Government will become a quagmire of bureaucrats that will be totally inefficient and will not help raise the standard of living for everybody. It will only serve the ones that are in there, the ones that are in the know, the ruling class. This is where if the trend does not get reversed, we're going to wind up with some kind of an oligarchy similar to what Russia has. Because I can't see that the powerful companies, particularly the tech companies, will be nationalized and run by the government. But it's going to be this kind of a marriage of the politically powerful and the industrial powerful, and the rest of us will go suck wind.
Right. So the idea of communism, socialism, not in history has not succeeded. It's never succeeded. What do you say to the new communist, or the new Marxist, really? The new Marxist that says, well, that's just because you didn't do it right, and there was a bunch of greed. And
yeah, I've heard this before. We actually, in East Germany, we were just waiting for the next leaders, because the ones that we had, we thought they were pretty stupid. They weren't uninspiring. They weren't stupid, but they couldn't communicate. They were stiff, and we were just, we're doing the right thing. We just need the right guy in leadership position. Well, that never happened. I got another thing that needs to be told the young revolutionaries. Mm-hmm. When you look at the history of revolutions, there's a core of core in leadership that will ally itself with somewhat softer folks to make some progress. As soon as the not so hardcore people have been used and did their job, they will be discarded, and in history very often actually killed.
Right.
The history of the revolution is such that it kills itself, and as the internecine warfare continues forever and ever. You saw that in the Soviet Union. I mean, between 1923 and 1953, there were 8 heads of the KGB, and of the 8, 9 were executed when they were replaced by their successor, who then was executed himself. That's how it is. This is evil, in the worst evil that you can imagine in human form, because those leaders, those radical leaders, they're out for themselves.
Yeah, I spoke to a guy some time ago. It was not in a podcast or an interview like this, but I spoke to a guy who, African American, he's now my friend, that lives out in Philadelphia, and he was telling me that his parents grew up in the radical black movement of the 60s and the early 70s, and that you know, the Black Panthers and all the different things that were going on then. And he said, you know, to a man, every one of those people, to a man or woman, every one of those people ended up dead, out of the country, or incarcerated for most of their lives.
Yeah. So what may have some kind of romantic allure to young people, you know, the whole idea is to just like, you know, create total equality and justice. Doesn't work out that way, and it's not possible anyway. It's not possible.
And do you see parallels to groups like Antifa and the Democrat Socialists and the stuff from your day and where you grew up and in really the context of your life? Do you see parallels in that?
Antifa is what's the word? The people that don't like laws and order.
Anarchists?
And they're anarchists. Anarchists were not allowed in East Germany. We were, you know, the power of the state controlled everything. So there was no anarchism. If there were any demonstrations, they were always against the evil Western people. There was just no fighting internally going on because the state suppressed any and all of that.
Sure.
So there was no parallels. But what I can see, there's parallels with other things that happen in history in other countries. And you know, Antifa is just they're nuts, they're evil, they're destructive. Don't want to get into Black Lives Matter. You know, I'm sure there are a lot of people who actually believe in the cause that Black Lives Matter is a proponent of, or that people, you know, the radical left on the Democrat Party is a proponent of, but they are being led by the nose. They're being used as tools rather than you know, being able to fulfill that dream that they're chasing after.
Right. So what can your book teach us Americans today? What can your book teach the Americans today of how to work and deal with life today in this changing world that we have?
You know, there's one thing I was thinking about this. You know, your company's primarily promoting business books, but I was in business too. There's a business of espionage,
right?
And when you read through the book and you get an understanding to what extent the Soviets went to prepare somebody like me to infiltrate the enemy, you may gain an instinctive understanding that it is quite possible that there are insiders in this country, in organizations and companies, possibly even in the government, that nobody knows because we learned how to hide in plain sight.
Right.
And the only reason that I was discovered by the FBI, they didn't discover me. It was based on a tip from a KGB defector. I lived 19 years undetected. And in those 19 years, I worked for one company that manages the electric grid for one of the states of the United States, and another company that owns a nuclear plant. And I was operating there. Nobody had a clue. So that's it is sort of secondary information. The other thing is that I would say, and this is more generic and it's not so much business, but you know, the human condition obviously leaks into everything that we do in business.
Yes.
And that's the power of love. The power of love that overcomes everything else, because my decision to leave the KGB was based on the love for a child and was super risky, but love overcame any potential fear, and I took that risk fully knowing that I might be discovered and be thrown in jail. That is fundamentally the number one message that comes out of my book.
Great.
And
yeah, that's the message we all need to hear, isn't it? Love covers a multitude of sins, and
yes, sir.
And it conquers all fear, doesn't it?
Yes, I have a friend who used to work for the FBI. He was a behavioral specialist in human behavior. And he wrote a book, and there's one sentence that he wrote that rings so true. He says there are two basic emotions that people have. They are at extreme ends. It's love and fear. Where there's one, the other cannot exist. When you're afraid, you can't love. But when you love, you are not. When you really love, you're not afraid.
Right. That's very good.
And now have a choice. Which one would you pick?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I gotta ask the question that everybody wants to ask. And given your vast experience in being an undercover agent and knowing that the Soviets, the Chinese, basically the enemies of the United States have put sleeper agents in our country and even in our government. I got the big question. Are you ready for it?
Go ahead.
Was Donald Trump a sleeper agent?
You're not the first one who asked that question.
I'm sure I'm not.
When my book came out, it was just, after Trump took over the presidency, and the collusion thing was all over the place.
Right.
I had at least 20 interviews on CNN and MSNBC, and they always asked me these loaded questions. And I told them that this is insane. It's not possible to have that kind of a grand conspiracy without, something coming out that's real proof.
Right.
And I warned the country of what the Russians are really up to, and this finally has been confirmed, and that's what we call in the business active measures. That's creating a bunch of fake news, creating fake persona on the internet, and trying to influence particularly extremist groups on the left and the right and whatever else to create confusion and ultimately for the people to lose faith in our democratic republic.
Yeah.
And I said that 4 years ago in my very first interview, and now today, the Washington Post agrees with me. Took 4 years. They could have just asked me. They could have saved the money that Mueller wasted on his investigation and all these attorneys. It was a bunch of bogus. And the bottom line is they're admitting it now.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's true. Jack, I really appreciate, I know that was a loaded question. It was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question, but I really appreciate you kind of rolling with me on that. So Deep Undercover is Jack Barsky's book. Jack, how can people, if they want to reach out to you and have you speak or be connected, what are some of the ways they can reach out to you? And what are you doing going into the future?
The easiest way is to go through my website. There's a contact form where you can reach me that gets to my email. Mm-hmm. Website is jackbarsky.com. If people don't remember it, just Google my name. Somehow at one point there's an entry that shows the website. That's
Sure.
That's the best way. And I have yet to not answer people that reach out to me. Sometimes it's just questions. Sometimes I get more certain questions and some other things. I'm very responsive to the extent I can handle it.
Sure.
I haven't had yet a flood of things, but I've been able to handle it, and I enjoy interacting with people, and I also enjoy interacting with people who reasonably disagree with me, because I don't claim to have a monopoly on knowledge in any field, other than maybe close enough to to who I am, because I had to really look very deep for quite some time to figure me out.
All right. Well, Jack, again, the book is Deep Undercover. You can get Jack's book by clicking on the link right below, or maybe it's right above. Somewhere on this page is a link that goes directly to his page. You can find out more about Jack right here. Jack, I just want to thank you so much for being on the Compendium Podcast. This has been a lot of fun. I hope to have you back again real soon.
Well, you and I could probably talk at least a half a day, and then we would still not be done, because we could easily branch out into all kinds of other topics that are wandering away from espionage.
Yeah, I really think that's true.
Okay.
So again, thank you so much, Jack. And for the rest of you, you can catch the Compendium Podcast every Monday and Wednesday right here on this channel, just by clicking like, and we'll be happy to make sure that you get a copy. Until next time, until the next podcast, where we bring in an author, a change leader, a thought leader from around the world, may God bless you in this wonderful day.
Thank you for joining us for today's broadcast. I do hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And be sure to visit us online at leadershipbooks.store. There you'll find the works of some of the finest thought leaders today. And be sure to tune in here each week to gain even deeper insights from one of those leaders on the Compendium Podcast.